Hi there, my name is Fidalgo and today I'll teach you about style components. So style components are basically your CSS in JavaScript. There is a whole argument out there if it's better to use CSS modules or style components. I'm not going to go into that. I prefer to use style components, so I write my CSS in JavaScript. So that's what I will be teaching you today. If you want to know more, you can go to their website, and under motivation there is a whole section explaining why you should use style components and why they created it. To start, we're going to bootstrap a React project. I open my console on VS Code. To do this, I hit Control backtick on my keyboard, and now I'm going to do npx create React app dot to create a React project on this folder, and I'm going to press enter, and we're going to wait for this to install. Now that our create React app project is bootstrapped, what I like to do is to delete everything inside the source component. I mean the source folder. So let's delete that. So now I'm just going to create a new file called index.js and another file called app.js. Inside here I'm going to import React from React. And I'm just going to do a normal functional component. So const app equals function. And I'm just going to return a div saying app. And then I'm going to export my function. So export my component. Into my index file, I'm going to import React from React. I'm also going to import React DOM from React DOM. I'm also importing my app component. And I'm going to create a const called root, which will be the root div that we have on the index HTML down here. I'm going to do root document dot query by ID root, and then I'm going to do React DOM dot render my app component on my root div. I'm going to open my console. I'm going to do yarn start, and we should have our React project created. So if we head over to localhost 3000, exactly, we have our app created. Now that we have our app bootstrapped, let's install style components. So let's do yarn add style - component, and you don't need to do anything else. Create React app already comes prepared to work with style components. So now that we have style components imported, let's close this up. Let's go into our app and let's try to style something. So let's do this, we do import style from style components. And now imagine we want to create to style this app here. How will we do that? So before we'll do something like this, and we'll say title, and then we'll say class name and pass it a class, right? And then style like that. With style components, we will use an ES6 feature, which is called tag template literals. And what it is, you might have seen where you write JavaScript with backticks and you write some text here, and then you interpolate the text with JavaScript. So to style the component here, we just do, for example, const, let's call it title. And then this will be styled, and now we're gonna tag it, so a styled h1, right? And now we write our CSS in here. So we can say color red, we can say font size, I don't know, 25 rem, and you will see my code jumping around from time to time. This is because of the Prettier extension that I have installed. So now we use a tag template literal to put our CSS inside here, and this automatically will generate an h1 tag with these styles. So right here we don't need the h1 anymore. We can just do title. Oops, we can just do title and say my style title here. And if we save and you go to our app, my style title, right? It's a little bit too big, but another thing that you can already see that style component is nice for is when you look at a component and you look at what's being rendered inside the component, you'll immediately see, oh, this is a title, oh, this is a card section, this is I don't know, a paragraph. You get more descriptive names of what it is, instead of having, for example, each one and then one div and then another div and then a section and then an article, and then it can become a little bit confusing. While with style components, if you name them properly, you can immediately see what it's being rendered on the DOM. So in the same way that we created an h1, we can create other HTML tags. So if we can do a const section, and this will be a style dot section, right? Section, and now we can pass our CSS here. So we can say padding to rem, and we can say margin, I don't know, to rem 2. So now if you use our section here, so we can just say section, and now if you go to our browser and we refresh, if we inspect our elements here, we'll see we have our section, and inside our section we have our h1, and we can see that our section has our CSS styles. So in a nutshell, this is what style components is. So now that we have a brief overview of what it is, let's delete this and let's leave our okay, let's delete this and let's create something more meaningful. So let's, for example, let's create our, let's call it main wrapper, and this will be a style section, right? And let's give it a width of 100%, max width of 1200 pixels, and margin 0 auto, for example. So this will be our main wrapper. And now here, we're just gonna wrap everything into this main wrapper. Oh, what the hell? There we go. So now we have our main wrapper created. Let's now, for example, create a button. For that, I'm going to create a new folder here called components. And inside components, I'm going to create a button.js file. Oops. Here, I'm going to import React from React. And I'm going to import style from style components, right? Now our button component will be a const button, and this will be an arrow function, and here we're going to return. And for now, let's do button. And now let's export default button. Now let's go to our app and let's import our button from components dash button. And now here, let's render our button. So how I like to do is, here I'll get the children, and then inside my button, I will render the children. So now everything we pass inside the button will be rendered inside the button. So let's call it button, or my button. My button, save this. If we go to our Chrome, we have our button right here. So now let's use style components to style the button. So imagine that our button has, and I'm gonna call it style button. It's a style dot button, and I don't know, let's say padding 1 rem, 1.5 rem, font size 1.8 rem, color, I don't know, 333, outline none, and let's see how this looks. And now here, obviously, we don't need to render the button, we render the style button. And here is our button. We can remove the border from it. Oops. Okay. And we can say background color. Let's make it like this, and let's make the color of the button white. I don't know. I'm just okay. So now imagine that you have two types of buttons. You have a primary button and we have a secondary button. And if your button is primary, you want the color of it to be, I don't know, green or purple or whatever. Since this is a component in the end, you can pass props to it. So imagine that here we say primary, right? So now here on our button, we can get our primary prop. So you can say primary. And since style components are component in the end, you can pass it. So you can say primary equals primary. And now here, since this is a template string, you can interpolate JavaScript into it, right? So here in the color, for example, remember that you can interpolate JavaScript here by doing $ curly braces. So here you can get the props, right? So you can just get the props as a parameter and then do a function and then return from it. So you can say if props dot primary, I want my color to be red. Otherwise, I want my color to be white. And now if you go to our button, the text is red. So now if you go here, we can create another button that it's not primary and call it my button, my primary button. And now if you go here, you see we have one button and another button, and one is red and one is white. Obviously, since this is JavaScript, instead of getting the props here, you can use destructuring. So you can use the function here and destructure the primary only. And then here you can say if primary exists, it will be red, otherwise it will be white, and the same thing will apply. Let's just give our section a display of flex and a flex direction of column. Okay, there is our two buttons. Let's give a margin to our button, so we can say margin bottom 1 rem, for example. There you go. So if you have to change a lot of stuff based on your primary prop, instead of doing this all over the properties, you can do something like this. So let's put just here white. And now I'm going to show you first a bad practice. So imagine you do here primary, and then this is your function, and you do if primary exists, and now you're going to start doing your stuff here. So you can do color. So imagine that your primary button changes a lot of stuff instead of only one property. You could go and do if color, and then if it's primary it's white, otherwise it's another color. Font size, if it's primary it's this, otherwise it's that other thing. But we can do something else, and I'm showing you here first a bad practice. So obviously we can interpolate a function here, and we can get the primary button, the primary prop, and we can say if the primary exists. So if the primary exists, execute this code. And here I'm gonna do color red. And you can already see that my syntax highlight broke, because you shouldn't do this. But let's just first try to see what happened. And I'm gonna say that the padding. And now here, imagine that you want to interpolate another thing, so another prop that you get. So let's do, I don't know, let's pass the prop padding. And then we can say return just the padding. And now let's say that our prop, let's not say padding, let's say background color. You can even see that I don't get hints anymore of what I'm supposed to write, while here, if I do background, I get syntax. But let's pass the BG color as a prop and just return it here. Color, and now let's get this prop here, and let's pass it to the component. Okay, now in our app, let's remove the padding and let's say that this is, I don't know, violet. Yeah, and now if we go back to our browser, you can see that it is putting here, but it's putting it as a function, and that's why you can't do this. So if you want to interpolate the nested stuff, there is an helper called CSS. So if you import the CSS from style components, and now here, instead of doing this, you do and CSS, and now you tag the CSS property. And you can see my syntax highlighting is back. And now you can see that this will work. So as you can see, my interpolation, my nested interpolation is working. So my point with this is you could still, if you don't want to do nested interpolations, you could do this, and this wouldn't work, but the color red would work. As you can see, it still works, but I don't recommend you to do this because, as you can see, your syntax highlight is broken, and this will be bad for a future developer to come and see stuff like this. So just always prefer, if you want to do nested interpolations, and if you want to change a lot of styles based on one prop, just use the CSS helper. This is becoming a little bit of a mess, so let's recreate these styles just for practicing purposes. So let's say, for example, that let's create our button and let's give it a background color of white, for example. Let's give it a color of I don't know, pale violet red, for example. A font size of 1.2 rem, a margin of 1 rem, for example. Let's give it some padding. Let's give it a border. For example, and let's give it a border radius of 3 pixels. Okay, let's see. Okay, it's looking better. So imagine that now this is our normal button, and we have a variation of a primary one. So as we learned, we can interpolate stuff here. So let's say primary, and then primary, and primary, and am I forgetting something? I am. So we tag this with the CSS, and now let's say that our primary button, the background color instead of white will be the other one. So palette violet red. The color of the button will be white, and I don't know, the border color, yeah, let's make it let's give it a box shadow, for example. And now 0.5 rem, no, 0.5 rem, 1.5 rem, and then RGBA 0, 0, so black, 0.2, for example. And let's go, and it's already looking better. So now imagine that you want to extend these styles. Let's just delete this and this too. You want to extend these styles. This is quite common for you to do. Either you have a button that you want to extend the styles on, or imagine that you are using some library and you import, for example, you are using Material UI or something like that, and you import the button from something else, right? It's just a component in the end. You can style components. So what would you do? For example, in this case, let's call it a super button. And this, instead of being a styled button, what we do is we can do, this is a function, so we can do styled, and then we can pass it our style button. And now, just as we did before, we can do our styles here. So let's say font size, in this case 2.5 rem, and now we have a button that will inherit all these styles, but will be bigger. So let's render here, for example, our super button. So our button now will return 2 buttons. Obviously, this is not a good practice, but what am I doing wrong? What am I doing wrong? We need to close our return. Okay. And now, as you can see, we have our normal button, and under it we have the button with the exact same styles, but just with a bigger font size. So you can do this for when you want to extend styles. So as I said, if you are using something from a library and you kind of like their styles, but you want to change the color of something or the background color of something, you can extend their styles by using the style function and pass it in the style, the component that you want to style, and then just styling it normally. A nice use case for this would be, for example, imagine that we are using a React router. So normally when you have a link, you import the link from React router. Of course, I'm not going to install it. And then you can just do, for example, const, I don't know, styled link, for example. And bear in mind that you always have to use capital letter on your styled components because they are components in the end. And then this will be a styled link. And then you just write your styles here. Yeah. Something that I've seen some people do is to put their styles inside the component. Don't do this. This is a super bad practice. It will impact performance a lot. So don't do stuff like this. Styled, I don't know, styled title equals a styled h2, for example, and color blue, and then you can render it here. This will work. Oh, it doesn't even work. Oh no, this is my React router import that's moaning. Okay, so this will work, but it's super bad. Don't do this. This is super bad for performance. Just keep your style components outside of the component itself. Another thing that you might want to do is to, for example, reuse a style component all over your page. So in this case, for example, please, I'm gonna just create a folder here called style. You can call it whatever you want. This is not a naming course. And let's just do index.js here. And now here I'm going to do import style from style components. I'm going to import React from React. And now, for example, I'm going to export const, let's call it, for example, let's call this wrapper, and then style.section. And we have a wrapper that will have a margin top, a margin top of 2 rem. And let's say the background color of this wrapper will be this one. I don't think we even need React here. So now we have our wrapper here that we can import whenever you want. So what we can do is, imagine, let's go to our button component, and here we can import our wrapper from our style file, and now here we can use this. So instead of using this React fragment here, we can use the wrapper here. And if we save, and if we go to our file, you can see we have our wrapper around both buttons. This is nice if you want to have, for example, I don't know, a wrapper like this, if you want to have like a margin that you reuse all over the place. Anything, you can pretty much put style components wherever you want and export them and import them into your components and reuse them. In the same way that we did, if you pass this prop, do this, otherwise do that, you can also do something like this. So imagine that you do something like, if you get the margin, and now you can do, if you pass a margin, use it, otherwise fall back to 2rem. Now you can go into our style button and we can pass the prop margin will be equal to margin, and now you get the margin here. And now if you go to our app and you go to our button and we say margin equals, for example, this button, you want it to be 5rem. And now you go here, the margin on this button now is 5rem, as you can see here. And if you don't pass it, imagine you remove it. If you don't pass it, it's just 2rem. So the possibilities are infinite here. It's just JavaScript in the end, so you can do pretty much whatever you want. Another thing you can do, and this is super handy. So for example, let's create a wrapper here. So let's call it this, I don't know, pagination wrapper. And then this will be style.div, for example. And now we're gonna do display flex and width 100%. And for now, let's do just this. So now imagine, let's use it here and let's pass it the button. And let's call this, I don't know, page 1. So now if we go back to our browser, you can see we have our page 1 here. Let's just remove, let's comment this out for now, and let's also comment out this wrapper. Let's just render our style button. Okay, so now if you go back to our browser, we have our wrapper here that we just created with display flex and with 100%. So now imagine if you have this come in hand in my movie library website. So imagine if you are on page 1, you want the button saying page 2 to be on the right side, right? And if you are on the last page, you want the button to be on the left side. And if you are on the middle of one of the pages, you want a button to be here and the other one to be here, right? So we can do something like this, for example. Let's go to our app. So you can use the justify content property, and let's get the prop that we'll pass here. Let's call it page. And now this is just JavaScript, so we can do if else's here. So we can do if page equals first. We want our button to be on the right side, so we can say return flex end. Else if our page is on the middle, right? For example, else if page equals middle. We want, so if it's the middle page, we'll have 2 buttons and we want them to be on one on each side. So let's say space between. Else we are on our last page, right? So else we can return flex start. And now we can do some calculations here to see what page we are on, and we can just pass page. And now if we pass, if it's the first page, we can see the button is on the right. So we would have something like this, page 2. And now if we are in the middle, we'll render two buttons, right? So for example, page 2 and page 4, meaning you are on page 3, and we do middle. And now we have one button on either side. And if you don't pass anything, you'd render like one button, meaning you are on the last page. And let's call this, for example, 5. And the button will be on the left side. So you can use like JavaScript inside this to pretty much calculate whatever you want. You can also make overs quite easily. So if you just come here and say and over, and let's say this button on over, the color will be white and the background color will be the palette red. If you go to our browser, you can just see on over changes. You can also target classes inside the component. So if you do the %, it will refer to that element itself. If you do something like here, some class, and now you do color blue, it will try to find a child inside this element with this class. So inside the style button, we can do like p class name equals some class test, and now we'll see it will be blue. As you can see, it's blue. This is the same thing as doing this, so you can do % space and it will still look for children inside. Let's now delete this. You can also do animation. So when on CSS you do like keyframes, you can do the same here. So you have to import an utility called keyframes. Now you can say const fade in equal keyframes, and then you tag it, and then you can say at 0% opacity will be 0, and then at 100% opacity will be 1, and then here you can say animation will take 2 seconds, and you refer to the fade in, and then you can give it is in. Now if you go to our browser and we refresh, you can see it animates. Obviously a nice case would be to put this fade in on our styled elements here and export it, and then here we could import the fade in, and we could use it here, and we wouldn't need this here, and then we will be able to reuse this. We will just need to import the keyframes here, and let's put this with a capital letter. And now on our button, we can import the fade in and refer to the fade in, and it should still work. And you can see it is working. So now imagine that we want this button to change when we over, for example, a wrapper. So let's create a wrapper here, and this will be a styled div, for example, and let's give it with 100%, and let's give it a back. This is fine. Let's now wrap our button on this. Okay, let's save. Now if we go back to our browser, we see we have this div here, and let's give it a color. Okay, let's give it also a margin. Let's see, margin top to rem, for example. Okay, now let's see that when we over this, we want the color of our button to change. We can do this in two ways. We can do it here or in the button itself. So here we can say something like outer wrapper, right? Over, and now we can say, for example, the color will be red. Now if you go here, you can see when we over the wrapper, the color of the button will be red. And we can also do it instead of doing on the button, we can do it on the wrapper itself. So we can do and over, and on over of this element, the styled button styles here, so color red. Now this will not work because we are using this before we define this. So for this way to work, we will need to put this after. And now if you go to our browser, you can see it works the same way. So this is how you can style another components when we over, or when you click or something like that on another elements. Another thing you can do with style components is to give them additional props. What I mean by this is, imagine you have a link, and all your links on your page will always have the target blank attribute. The target blank attribute means it will always open on a new tab. So instead of, for example, normally we could do this, so const link equals a style A, and then we can say color violet, and we can say font size 1.6, 5 RAM, and now we would do something like this, link, one link, another link, and you'd say, for example, href equals https, for example, and target blank. So now we have two links that will open on a new page, exactly like that. But as you can see, we are duplicating the target here. So imagine that all the links on your app would always open on a new tab. We could do like something like this, like styled a dot attributes, and now here it's a function that we get the props, and then return an object. And this is the short syntax to return on an arrow function. You can just use parentheses here, and you return an object, and on this object you just pass your attributes. So you can say that the target will be blank, and that's it. Obviously this is an object, so you have to use semicolons here, but you can say the target will always be blank. And now we don't need this here because we are already doing it up there. So now basically you are saying, okay, all these links, all the component, this component link will always have this attribute, target blank. And you can do how many attributes you want. You can do, for example, a button that will always have the type be a button instead of a submit. And if we go back to our app, you can see it still opens on a new tab. Another thing that's quite common for you to have on your apps, it's, for example, a CSS reset file. So to do this in style components, you also can. It's called global styles, so you can inject some CSS file into your app. So for example, I'm on my, let's go to our index file, and here we can inject our global styles into our app. So to do this, let's go into, for example, source, and let's create a new folder called, I don't know, theme, for example. And let's create a new file called global styles.js. And here we will import something from style components. And this is called create global style. So now what you do is you can do const, for example, global style equals create global style. And now here you pass all your global styles. So we can say that HTML, the height will be 100%. You can say that all elements will have the padding of 0 and margin of 0. Just a normal reset file. What am I missing here? Oh, this is not a comma. And now we can export default global style. And now this is just, what's wrong here? Oops. And now this is just a normal style component. So we can go into our index, for example, and we can import global styles, global style or styles, whatever you want from. And we're going to theme, global styles. And now we just mount it here besides our app. So we can do something like this. Remember, we need a React fragment to mount two components without a wrapper. And this is a self-closing component, so you can do like this. And now we are mounting our global styles into our app. And now if you go back to our app, and if we inspect our HTML, you can see our styles are here. So everything has a padding and a margin of 0, and the HTML height is 100%. So you can do this to create like reset CSS styles. You can put your fonts in here, for example, and that kind of stuff. So now let's jump into one of my favorite features of style components, and that's the theme provider. So let's create a theme file in our theme folder. Let's create a new file called theme.js, and here we can have like an object with all our theme stuff. So let's do, for example, export const theme, and this is an object, and let's put, for example, our colors here. And let's say that our main color is, for example, I don't know, let's put something like, I don't know, I'm just gonna copy some colors here. Okay, this is just some random colors, and this is handy because you can have like all your design basically here, all the colors that you have within your app. And now let's go to our index file. Let's import our theme from theme/theme, and let's make it a normal export, a default export. So let's export default like this. Now we have our theme, and now from style components we import something called the theme provider. So from style components, and it's called the theme provider. And now, as you might guess, we wrap our app in a theme provider. So we can say theme provider, and we put this inside, and now we don't need the fragment anymore. And now we just pass it the theme. So we say that the theme is equal to the theme. And now inside every style component that you write on the props, you will have the theme variable. So if we go to, for example, our button, and let's go to the color here on the props, you'll have props.theme.colors and then .main, for example. And now if you go to our app, you can see that the buttons are using that color. And to be more, let's use, for example, on the background color instead of white. Let's just copy this over. And let's use the light color. Now if you go, you can see we are using the light color. Obviously we can destruct the theme here and use it, but this opens up so many possibilities. So for example, in our theme, so let's go to our theme, we can create another object here called font weights or font sizes. Imagine you have like a guide from the designer. Oh, this is the font sizes that we have on our app. So you can say, for example, that a large font is 3 rem, medium font is 2 rem, a P, for example, is 1.5 rem, whatever you want. And then you can just use them on your style component. So here you can just say that on the theme .fonts.p font sizes, and now this will have that font size, as you can see. My favorite use case for this is for media queries. So since you have access on all style components, you can do something like this. So let's call it media queries. And now you can say, I don't like to call it like smallest or biggest, because then imagine you have to introduce another media query, and then you'll be like, oh, now what will I call it like smallest. So I just call it, for example, let's call this one below 768, for example. And now you can say only screen, right? And max width 768 pixels, and so on and so on. And now we can go here and we can say, for example, add media, and then we can get the theme here, and on the theme.media queries.below-768, and now we can write our CSS here. So we can say that the font size here will be 0.4 rem, the color will be blue, whatever you want. And here we can't do it like this. Obviously, we need to, since we have the dash, we have to access like this on this position. And now if you go into undefined, why is it undefined? I think I misspelled something. Media queries, exactly. So now if you go into our file and we shrink, you can see that the media query kicks in. So you can see here that on our button the font size is smaller. So this is an awesome use case for media queries, for example. And of course this is not the best naming, because this makes you have to use this square brackets access. You can do, for example, dot below 768. This will be like a better naming. And then here you can do below 768, will be better. But you can see you can use this like for font weights, for colors, for font sizes, for paddings, for margins. You can do, for example, spacers. So spacers, and then you can say that the large is 2 rem, for example. I don't know, just an example. And then you can use these spacers on your app. So then if your designer is like, oh, you need to change these spacers, now the large spacer will be 1.8 rem instead of 2. You can just come here and change it, and it will change everywhere on your app. So everywhere where you would do, for example, like margin dash top, and here you do like theme dot spacers dot large. You wouldn't need to touch any of this stuff. You just go to your theme and you change your amount of spacing, and it will just work. I suggest you head over to their documentation page and their API reference. You have a lot of stuff here. They pretty much go over everything I just went over. So that was my style components crash course. I hope you liked it. If you have any questions or suggestions for the next video, please let me know in the comments. If you like the video, please give it a like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.